Hey, Elisa, how you guys doing? Hope you had a great weekend. Happy June. Yes, we made it to June. Hey, quick joke. What is the best exercise for least motivated people? That would be the diddly squat. Yes. Try that one with your phys ed assignment. You can do a little time, was it not time lapse? I guess it's time lapse. Time lapse video of you guys doing diddly squat. See how that flies with the phys ed department. I didn't give you the idea. All right. So for today, we're actually going to start a new unit, last unit of the year, big business and labor unions. So we're going to start off by talking about names you probably have heard of and like how do these guys get like ridiculously rich? So people like Vanderbilt, Carnegie, Rockefeller, Morgan, Frick for the art people. So that's how we're going to start, and then we'll shift towards, the last couple of days, looking at labor unions, the people who worked for them. So these guys who make a ridiculous amount of money, through industry, and then the people who work for them. That's kind of what we're looking at in this unit. All right. So I hope all is well. Stay safe, stay smart, and I'll talk to you guys later. So today we will start our new unit on big business and labor, and in particular is talking about railroads, as railroads were the first big business. So as railroads kind of explode in this time period right after the Civil War, you have the first off that railroads are safer. So steel rails replacing iron rails, right? So the steel does not rust out, which means these rails now will stay sturdy, which means the trains will be safer, right? The Westinghouse air brake. Westinghouse air brake is a braking system that brakes all the cars in the train at the same time, rather than just applying the brakes at the front and then having the caboose smash into the rest of the train. Now, when someone applies the brakes, all the cars stop at the same time. And if all the cars stop at the same time, again, you're being safer. In addition, you have coal and coal being found all over the place. And so, with tons of cheap coal available, it equals a cheap fuel source, making railroads something that's quite viable. And so, also at the same time, as well, there's this increased need now for steel, right? So, you have steel rails for the trains, you have bridges that need to be built, steel for locomotives, things like that. And so at the same time, there's a brand new way to make steel called the Bessemer process. And so the Bessemer process, basically you take, so steel, iron ore comes out of is from a rock, so you have to dig it out of the ground. And so when you dig it out of the ground, there's also like impurities in there. There's bits of rocks, other minerals, that type of thing. You need to remove that from the iron to forge it. So if you have like old mental pictures in your head of some guy taking like, a piece of iron and getting it hot in a oven, right, or in a fire, and then taking a hammer and smashing it to shape it, that's kind of what that person was trying to do. The Bessemer process does all that a lot quicker and makes a much better product. So you take all that iron ore and you kind of dump it into a big giant furnace, and you make that furnace like white hot. And by it burns off the metal. The rock doesn't burn off, it doesn't melt, but the metal inside that rock does liquefy. And as it liquefies, you get this big giant vat or pool of liquid metal, and all the rock and impurities then float up to the top, and you can get rid of those and just skim them out. And then once you get rid of the impurities, you can now pour this molten metal, and you can pour it into any shape you want. Barbed wire, steel rails, steel I-beams, that type of stuff. And what you're getting now is a process that is cheaper, but also makes a higher quality, sturdier product. And again, at just the right time with railroads. And you can see from this map that you see railroads basically exploding all throughout the North. Again, at this time period, right around the Civil War. And the railroad is going to have profound impact on the country. So as the railroad moves west, people move west, which means agricultural markets expand because farmers now can ship their products using the railroad. So now a farmer used to be able only to sell his stuff as far as he could physically carry it. But now the railroad can transport food products to cities on the coasts. Now, to do all this, you got to coordinate train traffic, so which means you have to coordinate schedules, which means time now becomes important. People didn't need to know what time it was. You worked from when you can see to when you can't see. But now, if trains are going to move, you need to have a train schedule, which means you have to coordinate um, train travel. And so you have to create time zones because, again, time is going to be relative based on sunlight. So as we know, as the sun travels, right, it takes time for that to travel, and so it's what is high noon in one place is different than someplace else. So you now have to create time zones, and this now becomes a regular thing in the country. And so railroads now as big business. So you have companies that are looking to, basically get rich off of this. And so you had to destroy competition. So you did this through various ways. So you had stock watering. And so stock watering is which you would inflate how much your company was actually worth. So you would lie, your stock value would then go up, more people would invest, thinking the country was valuable, and then with all that investment, you can then take that money and destroy your competition. Little railroads would then need to compete, so they would pool their resources. They would share engines, they would share cars, that type of stuff. So that's why when if you look around in town, you'll see a bunch of New Jersey Transit cars being pulled by a Metro North locomotive, right? This idea of that you're pooling your resources so that you can share with other little railroad companies. And of course, farmers were victims is because they were dependent on these large railroads. They needed these railroads to kind of make their money. And railroads knew this, and they had these farmers that they could then victimize. And the big name in this was Cornelius Vanderbilt, building the New York Central Railroad. And he was the first big, giant name in railroad business. So at some point, the government has to try to step in and do something to protect people. The problem is that the government is basically being financed by these big business people, right? So these big business people are getting politicians into office. They have sway, and so they're making sure that these laws are passed that aren't really hurting big business interests. And this is going to be a running trend we're going to see through this unit and into the things you'll begin talking about next year in US 2. So the Interstate Commerce Act is passed because states had been trying to do this, and the Supreme Court steps in and says states cannot pass these laws to protect these small farmers. Only the federal government can. And so the federal government creates the Interstate Commerce Commission, which on paper looks like it's supposed to do this. But of course, the commission is given no power to actually enforce these things. And that kind of becomes a big problem during this time period.